So I will do a comparison between iBuyPower and a CyberPower PC. So I recently bought the iBuyPower this year, just recently, about a couple weeks ago. And the CyberPower PC is from April of last year. That's April 2021. Both of these PCs are pre-built and ready to ship because right now the lead times for the custom builds are just too long. You're looking at approximately 4 to 8 weeks for custom builds. So, I mean, the quickest way and the most reasonable way is to just go with what they have. So, if I can just summarize, so basically the specs are slightly different, and you really have to kind of dig into the details of the specs. So, is there one that's better than the other? It's really hard to say. So my suggestion is that if you're in the market for a PC, first look at the specs, like the CPU, GPU, identify the amount of memory, and then identify the cheapest unit or most reasonable unit that makes sense, and then contact the manufacturer, whether it's system integrator or the OEM, to get more information. So things like the motherboard. Who makes the graphics card, the DRAM, the SSD, who are the manufacturers, what's the model number, and that will tell you what is your speed or specification. Now, in terms of comparison, let me just first off say that the iBuyPower is a $1,300 system. That's before tax. CyberPower PC is $1,100 system. So they're slightly different tier. However, most of that is due to the CPU and the GPU. So the other components and the case should not matter. And also the CyberPower is 1 year old. Yeah, sorry for the background noise. I'm doing this video outside because there's more room. I can put it on this patio table. And it's just bright, right? It's bright, so it's easier to film. And today is garbage day, so there's some noise in the background. Yeah, so in summary, I don't think there's one that's better than the other. iBuyPower, at least for this specific model, the case is better built. For motherboard, again, this could be CPU dependent. The iBuyPower is better because it's ATX, and CyberPower PC is micro ATX. For the DRAM, these are on the spec sheet, so you can look that up. For the SSD, this is a pretty downside for the iBuyPower because the SSD speed is very slow. For the cooling, the iBuyPower is better. It has AIO liquid cooling. This is also listed on the spec. So let's start off with the exterior. On the left is the iBuyPower. On the right is CyberPower PC. So the iBuyPower, actually, I'm going through an RMA right now for a component. And hopefully, fingers crossed, it's just a component that needs to be replaced and not the motherboard. That's why I have not taken the wrappings off of the case yet. So bear with me without the wrapping and the reflection. The design is slightly different. The iBuyPower, they have various case types. Most of them have this kind of a futuristic looking, angular, asymmetric styling to it. I guess it's really your taste, right? Whether you like it or not. I don't really care. It's just a PC. Whereas a CyberPower PC has just a more regular rectangular styling. So in terms of the case weight and build, I find the iBuyPower to be slightly better. So the iBuyPower is 32 pounds. It weighs 32 pounds, everything. And if I look at the construction of the case, the thickness of the metal, it just seems more sturdier. On the other hand, CyberPower PC, it weighs about 26 to 28 pounds, so about 5 to 6 pounds lighter. It's not bad, but it's just in comparison, the iBuyPower case is beefier. Yeah, for the overall design of these cases, they're very similar. So in the front, they have glass On the left side of the case, this is looking from front or rear, looking at the computer from the front. You have a glass side on the left side, and then you have a metal side on the right side. Now I have removed the sides already. The iBuyPower, it just built a little bit better. So for instance, on the glass siding, there's actually foam. So if there's vibration, yeah, there's a foam there, so it's not going to cause any sound. Whereas a CyberPower PC, there isn't. It's just a metal on metal. The air intake and the outtake. So for the iBuyPower, the air intake is only on one side of the front panel. So on the left side, it's basically sealed, it's solid. And there are no holes in the front, even though there's seems to be this slot here, but there's no opening there. So basically, all the intake of the air is on the right side. As for CyberPower PC, this is the front of the PC, and you can see that there's an air intake on the left side of the front panel, and also on the right side of the front panel. So there's actually more air intake for the CyberPower PC. Now, in terms of the air outlet, the iBuyPower is better. So the entire top surface for the iBuyPower has a hose to let the air out, whereas a CyberPower PC is only in the top rear, right? It's a little square section, and there's less air to go out. Now in the rear, both of them do have outtake where the fan is, right? So that's no different. Now I don't think the air intake is that big of a deal. To me, having more opening on the top, letting the air out, is more important. And as the air leaves the system, leaves the case, it creates a vacuum, right? So you will actually draw more air in. Another advantage of the iBuyPower is the kind of the dust screen. And if you look through the fan blades themselves, you can see that there's a screen there, right? So that's yeah, a dust screen to protect dust from getting in. And then if you look at the top, it also has a dust screen there, so dust doesn't get in. Whereas CyberPower PC doesn't have this. So this is another kind of build quality for the iBuyPower. This is an iBuyPower, the top plate. You can actually unscrew it and the top plate will come off. So if you want to do some mod for the top, the iBuyPower is easier. For the CyberPower PC, unfortunately the top is part of the case, so it's not removable. And you can also see that the ports is basically integrated into the part of the top plate. Yeah, in terms of the case feet, the iBuyPower is chrome plated. I'm sure it's plastic, but actually underneath that is actually pretty heavy, solid rubber feet. So that's really good, right? That's good for isolation. And then for the CyberPower PC, it's basically just a piece of rectangular plastic. So I am on the right side of the computer for iBuyPower. The top ports are laid out on the right side. And there's a small concern here in that the ports and the cables are kind of exposed in the case on the right side. So if you have the case open and you're moving or lifting the computer, you have to be very careful that you don't hold it here and then damage the cables or the ports. CyberPower PC, on the other hand, has the ports in the front. This is actually better in my experience because it's easier to access. And also the cables and ports are hidden behind the front plate. So it's not open to the user damaging those cables or ports. Let's move on to the motherboard. So typically for the specification, they only state the chipset that is used for the motherboard. They don't tell you the brand or model number. If this is important to you, you should contact the manufacturer and get that detail. So for the iBuyPower, it actually comes with an ATX board. So that's a plus. That means there are more ports and just easier to upgrade. CyberPower PC, on the other hand, has a micro ATX. Okay, not bad, but it just has less ports for expandability. So in terms of motherboard, iBuyPower is better than CyberPower PC. However, this can also be highly system dependent. It depends on your CPU and the chipset that goes with that. Now let's move on to the RAM, the DRAM. So for the DRAM memory, the specification is actually stated. So for the iBuyPower, it's basically a 3200 megahertz. And for the CyberPower PC, it is 3000 megahertz. But let me add a little bit more detail on this. Both of these are DDR4. So that means the base speed is actually 2400 megahertz. However, there's the XMP, the extreme memory profile, and the chip themselves are spec to run at a higher speed. And if you use the extreme memory profile, which needs to be supported by the motherboard, you can run at a higher speed. Now for the iBuyPower, the memory is spec at 3200 megahertz. However, once I run the XMP, the computer will actually have errors and have blue screen crashes. So if I'm using Windows, it's actually not too bad. It just crashed once over a 2-day period. However, when I play game, so if I play PUBG, for sure, once I airdrop, land on the ground, within 5 minutes, the computer will crash. And it's very consistent. And once I turn off the XMP and roll back the memory speed to 2400, it's working fine. So I did some troubleshooting with iBuyPower. I actually took the memory from the CyberPower PC into the iBuyPower and showed that XMP does work on the CyberPower PC memory. So it seems as though it's not a motherboard or chipset problem. It's actually the memory themselves. So I'm actually waiting for iBuyPower to provide RMA for the memory. That's why I haven't taken the wrappings off of the case. So fingers crossed that it's only the memory. And if I get the new memory, if everything works, great. Now, if it is a motherboard chipset that has some incompatibility, and that means the whole system have to go back to iBuyPower so they can replace the motherboard. And hopefully that's not the case. So right now I'm still using the computer. I just need to run it at 2400 megahertz. Now I could also potentially do just overclocking myself, just crank up the voltage manually and increase speed. And maybe you will not reach 3200. Maybe I can run at 3000. But still, right? I mean, I bought the system. It's spec to be 3200, and that's what the chip should run at. Even though XMP is a overclocking, but that's what it's spec at. Now, moving on to the CyberPower PC. In their specification, they state that the memory is 3000 megahertz, and it's true. If you look at the model and the brand and the model number, it is 3000 megahertz. However, for this Intel chipset, the maximum speed is 2666. So that's the max you can run. Yeah, so you get a 3000 megahertz DRAM memory. However, the chipset is not compatible, so you can only run to 2600. So yeah, in both of these cases, there is an issue with DRAM. Now, the iBuyPower is more severe. I mean, it's basically, the DRAM I believe, is defective. So hopefully the RMA will resolve it. For the CyberPower PC, it's just a limitation of the chipset, and they should have known that when they put the specifications on on the system. Okay, let's move on to the SSD. The iBuyPower and the CyberPower SSDs, you cannot see the model number. They're hidden by a heatsink. Both of them has a heatsink on it. So you have to remove the SSD, the heatsink, to see the model number and to look up the specifications. And this one, there's a huge difference. The iBuyPower is ADATA, Swordfish. It has a read and write of 1800 and 1200 megabytes per second. So that is not very good. On the other hand, the CyberPower PC, the SSD is an XPG. it has a read of 3500 and a write of 3000 megabytes per second. So the CyberPower PC's SSD is more than twice as fast as iBuyPower. Now this specification is not listed on the spec sheet. And I just assumed, my experience with CyberPower PC was actually positive. I saw that it actually has pretty good spec SSD. I assume iBuyPower, I'll get something similar, at least something, average, right? Instead of something that's slow at 1800 and 1200. So, this is something you should check with the manufacturer on the spec before you get the system. In terms of the cooling, the iBuyPower is better. This is also listed on the spec. So what you have is you have a all-in-one AIO liquid cooling system. So that's basically beside this thing here, and there's a cooling that's going to the fan. So that comes with the system. On the other hand, CyberPower PC just have a standard fan, CPU fan, and it's actually just Intel branded. It's not even a good fan. It's just a small heatsink and small fan on top of it. So in terms of the cooling system, iBuyPower is better. In terms of the accessories, both systems come with their own branded keyboard and mouse. However, they're not very good. So for the CyberPower PC, the mouse broke within the first couple days. And I contacted them. They actually sent me a new mouse. And then the second mouse also broke after 1 week. And this is by a different user, by my kid. So there's definitely some design flaw with their keyboard and mouse. Other YouTubers complain about the mouse breaking also. So yeah, they do come with their keyboard and mouse, something you probably can use to set up. You have to budget $50 to $100 to get your own keyboard and mouse. And in terms of tech support, I had to contact iBuyPower regarding the memory. And for CyberPower PC, I had to contact them regarding the mouse, the broken mouse. And in both cases, their response is quite good. The issue is that they don't respond to email. So if you send them email, nothing happens in both cases. But if you do call them up, and if you talk to a tech support or a customer rep, they're actually very helpful. So for the iBuyPower, so when I called in, I probably waited about 10 to 15 minutes. And then basically they gave me an option to have a callback. So I took that option. So probably about 30 minutes after that, I received the callback. And the tech support is actually quite knowledgeable. And I explained the problem. He knew immediately it's potentially an XMP incompatibility. And, he's also right in terms of it could be the memory itself could be a problem. It could be the chipset on this motherboard. So the easiest way is to swap out the memory to troubleshoot. And that's what I did. And like I mentioned earlier, fingers crossed, it is a memory. And I'm going to get a RMA on that. And hopefully once I replace it, you'll be good. If not, if it's the motherboard, then that means the whole system needs to go back for a replacement. In terms of the CyberPower PC, like I said, I contacted the customer support about the broken mouse, and very, very fast. They don't even ask me to send back the old mouse. They just send me a new one. So in both cases, I have a good experience with their customer support. Well, I hope this video has been helpful for you. Good luck in your PC purchase.